Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're all very welcome back to episode 15. That's right, 15 in our ongoing and absolutely fantastic series inspired by the Von Trapp family singers from the beautiful Austrian Alps. How do you solve a problem with Maria and me, Gareth? And without much further ado, I'll welcome you to this episode. If you're listening on LinkedIn, now you can put comments into the LinkedIn feed by commenting on this post. They'll appear as questions for us and we'll answer them if you're listening to this in the future. Welcome to the recording. I'm joined as ever by my good friend Maria Machado. Maria, how are you doing today?
Spring has sprung, and of course, Flora attacked me. So yeah.
Oh no. You have an allergy, Maria, or what's going on?
Several.
Oh dear.
Just to plants in general and pollen in particular.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully it won't stop you from imparting some of your deep knowledge on the writing of review papers, because in this post-Easter resurrection episode of the Maria and Gareth Solving Problems LinkedIn Live series, we're going to be talking about review papers, which, as Maria will now introduce to us, are quite different to other kinds of research papers, right, Maria? Give us a little bit of background to review papers. What are they?
So some people think that whenever they start a project and they start reading up on everything around the subject, that's what they're doing, that they are basically writing up notes for a review paper. That is not the same thing. You can have a literature review in the beginning of a thesis, a PhD thesis, a master's dissertation, which is not going to be exactly translated into a review paper. A review paper is a very different beast, and because Fauna is not attacking me today, just Flora, we will tackle this.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, one of the most common questions to start this event today, one of the most common questions that we get asked at SciTrain when we're doing our webinar events, our workshops, and by the way, if you'd like one, do get in touch with us afterwards. We're always keen to talk and arrange online or face-to-face training sessions for researchers. One of the most common questions that we get asked is, I'm doing a review, a literature review for my thesis, my master's thesis, or my PhD. How can I write that up as a review paper? And this is a fundamental misconception amongst researchers, especially early career researchers. As Maria's just said, a literature review, which often is the first part of your PhD thesis work, and a review paper published in the international peer-reviewed literature are not the same, right, Maria?
Right. So they have different audiences, they have different objectives, and they're geared towards very different purposes. So a literature review in the beginning of your PhD is something that tells you, that tells people that you are writing the PhD for, usually evaluators, that you have gone through the context in the field and that you have selected a narrower question that you're going to answer within your thesis. So a review paper is not that. A review paper is something that you are developing a theory, that you are expanding ideas. Usually review papers are written by series of people, group of people, or sometimes just one person, but it's someone well established in their field, usually senior, that has an opinion on what's been going on and is willing to share their opinion.
And as we'll come on to in a moment, a lot of this confusion comes from the use of the word review in literature review and review paper. And I must get this question on an almost daily basis in the training sessions that we do, because it's not the same. You do a review as part of the early stages of your PhD or your master's thesis. You collect literature, as you can see here on this slide. You review that literature in order to find what we call knowledge gaps, working with your supervisor or team of supervisors as you develop your strategy for doing your research project over a 3, 4, 5 year period. This is not something that you would then very often publish, if at all. And sometimes, depending on your field of research, a literature review might form part of your introduction to a research paper, but very rarely, which is why we've talked about this a little bit on this slide. A literature review is carried out when you start a research project. Of course, as the name suggests, this involves a comprehensive search of relevant literature, lots of AI tools available to help you do that. Now, of course, Cite being a great one, we recommend Cite.ai. You might have to reach out to colleagues. You can use this process as you start your research project as a way of developing ideas, your own writing style, and so on. But not often would you put much of that into any published papers, let alone a review paper, right, Maria?
That's right, but it does help you to speed up the writing process whenever you're writing your own research papers, because you know that whenever you're developing arguments, that some papers you can cite to support their argument or to contradict their argument, or that you are answering a question that a certain paper posed and could not answer at the time. So that is quite good for your own self-reflection, for your own progression, and for knowing ever more in your field. But a literature review is not a review paper. So as we said, it provides the context for your own research, whilst a review paper is trying to mold the field and to expand it in directions where it wasn't going before, to open up new research fields, not to find a gap in what's already there.
And usually what happens with review papers is that you would be a more senior person, or you'd be a member of a research team that's already got a number of publications under their belt or under your belt. And then you would approach a journal, or rarely be approached by a journal, as we'll come on to talk about in a moment, to write a review. As Maria's just suggested, just been talking about, this would then be something that stimulates discussion, talks about something that's, you know, controversial or new or debated in a particular field. You write that paper, you're invited to write that review paper, and then that becomes a standard in the literature. Whereas a literature review, on the other hand, as we've discussed, is the first stage of a PhD or master's project, helps you to identify gaps in the literature, information that already exists, and so on. So hopefully with this mini introduction to our LinkedIn Live today, and by the way, of course, you can put any questions or comments or feedback into the LinkedIn comments, we have touched upon the difference between these two very similarly named elements of the academic lifestyle. There's another one as well, though, which makes it even more confusing, and that's a narrative review. So we've talked about literature reviews, and those are things that you do at the start of your research project. Review papers, and we'll come back to those in a moment. But Maria, a narrative review? It just gets even more confusing.
So this has been named basically in order to differentiate it from another thing that exists, which is a systematic review. A systematic review is actually an original research paper, which is named as a review, which is really confusing. But the key word in it is that it's systematic. You have a search strategy, you're going to collate outcomes, and you're going to compare outcomes within a set of subjects, samples, populations. You're going to do new statistical analysis on data that has already been collected, and that produces new data, new insights. A narrative review sets work in a historical context and gives you the current understanding. It is not meant to provide new data. for people in the field?
I'm getting really confused, and we need to stop for a moment and just review some of this information. We've got a comment here in the chat that says, it sounds like a literature review is more for early stage PhD researchers, while review papers are for more advanced ones. Exactly, yeah. So a literature review, that's what you do at the start of a research project. A narrative review, overview articles about particular subjects, reviewing again, like what's already been done. Systematic reviews, as Maria was mentioning, these are, again, you look at a body of research, you might reanalyze or do reworking of statistical work on a particular systematic topic, and then review papers themselves. It's all totally confusing. Maria, are you confused?
No, because usually I do peer review, which is another kind of review that we're not even going to discuss today. So, there's lots of things called review. Don't get them confused because they're very, very different. A narrative review is to set the standards in the field. It's a goal. It's state of the art. It's to give you something, some new idea. A literature review is something that you do to get to know the state of the art in the field. Systematic review is original research. You get to analyze data that you haven't produced yourself, but you are analyzing data produced by others to give new insights onto a very, very specific question.
I think we're a bit less confused now. Thank you so much for that. Narrative reviews are overview articles about particular subjects. Why, though, would you consider writing a review article in your field? And this is often done, as we've mentioned, by invitation from journals. And so one good way to get yourself set to write a review paper is, of course, to talk to journal editors, to write to journal editors, to reach out to them and inquire as to whether they would be interested in receiving a review from you or your research group. And that's very unlikely, therefore, to be a literature review. It's got to be something that talks about something that will be of broad interest to the research field. And we've put on this slide a few of the reasons why you might consider doing that as a service to researchers, students, policymakers, or of course for your own personal advancement, self-education, build up your own research profile. I wrote a few review papers in my career, Maria. They were all invited by journals. What about you?
They were all invited as well. And it has to do with whenever you start publishing original research in a topic and people want to know more about how that topic relates to broader field, how it's going to evolve in future, how do you see it, how your work of several research papers fits into answering a specific question in the field, then they will ask you. And most of the time, a lot of people that write narrative reviews and that are invited to write narrative reviews will end up citing a lot of their own original research papers and those of their competitors as well. Don't forget that you have to make arguments both for and against an idea. But you are, because you are knowledgeable in that field, you know the literature, and you can provide different insights that other people that are just arriving to the field, for instance, new PhD students, often get to read a lot of these narrative reviews to figure out what's been going on and what's important and what's relevant and what people have done in the past so that they don't repeat the same things.
Really, really important. So let's imagine that we're in that position now and we're starting to think about putting a review paper together and pitching that review paper to a journal. And many of the techniques that we would use to do that are quite similar to the techniques that we would use for writing any research paper. But a review article, you want to get it as highly cited as possible. You want as many people in your field to pick it up and read it and cite it, because of course other researchers love citing review papers because it means they don't have to cite loads of other primary literature. It's much easier to cite like one or two big review papers that deal with that state of the art in a particular area than going after lots of primary literature. Sorry, Maria.
Sorry, and I think it's especially important because you still have lots of journals that give you a limit for the number of references that you can cite. So if you have a couple of those review papers that you've read and that you actually like and that you know provide a good broad overview of a topic, just cite those and you don't have to cite like 10 or 20 different ones.
Yeah, you've got a word limit. I mean, average length of an academic paper, probably around 5,000 or 6,000 words. So in your introduction, great to put a few review papers in there. But what about the title, abstract and keywords for your paper, for your review paper, Maria? What tips do we have to make sure that those elements of the writing are as compelling and alluring and attractive as possible?
Well, there are usually a lot of reviews being written on a hot topic at any given moment. So you want your title to stand out. But you also want people to know from the title what you're going to tell them. You don't want to have, for instance, giant lungfish genome elucidates the conquest of land by vertebrates. It's very, you know what you're going to talk about, right? You're going to know what you're going to read. You're going to read about genomics and how you can use it to figure out evolution and how species have evolved from one to the next. And I can understand that even not being in the field. So you have to make the title understandable to as broad an audience as possible, because you're going to have people that usually don't read your papers reading your papers, because you're providing an overview, a service, a state of the art. You're providing something that's useful to introduce people to a field and for them to know what's in reading just a couple of words, what is going on in a very, very busy environment that will probably take you, that would have taken you reading 40, 50, 60 papers.
Yeah, it's important to like get people interested, because review papers tend to get a lot more citations than your average papers. Keep your titles short. Research has shown, by the way, that titles less than 7 words in length do tend to get more citations. So be interesting, attractive. Give your readers a question, but then don't answer it, is one technique to keep people really interested in reading your papers. These are called non-declarative titles, where you don't tell the reader the answer to a question, but you get them interested in learning more. And don't forget about those keywords for search engine optimization. Really, really important. Maria, do you want to say a few words about how you can make sure that people find your research?
So this is ever changing. More and more, we see that even with search engines, they are ever changing. And one of the things I read recently is that someone typed a very open-ended, broad question into ChatGPT and was given a very strict, very narrow reference. And that, because of the tone of the question, it matched the tone of the writing in the work that was cited, that was referenced. So evermore, there is a way for you to reach an audience of people. You just need to know what is the main way that people in your field will search for specific processes and names. So, for instance, giant lungfish, it's the name, the standard name of an animal. You don't have to put the Latinized name, because that would be a way that you would reduce the number of people that will get to your paper.
We're editors, you see, as well. We love editing. We spend a lot of time editing papers, especially Maria. She's always like editing, getting into the English. And a recently edited example of some work that was done here, you can see the title is short and sweet, because we've talked about how shorter titles get more citations. You're less than 7 words if possible, but between 10 and 20 would be your kind of absolute maximum. No complicated words. Most of your readers for all of your research papers in general, and this is something that lots of people often forget, they're not going to be native speakers like me and Maria. They're not going to be native speakers. They will be engaging with your content in a second language. So make sure you make your titles understandable, Maria.
And understandable doesn't mean being dumbed down. For instance, in this one, it was incredibly important to tell the people what was the normal name or the common name of the bug that was there, that was the focus of that paper. And it was very important to get the grammar and the prepositions right so that people could picture in their heads how this ladybird was attaching onto leaves. Because attaching to leaves is not the same thing as attaching onto leaves, and it gives you a completely different image in your head that is very subtle. And sometimes, if you don't have a very narrow command of English, you wouldn't get to that level of pernickety that is essential sometimes to get people to understand what you're talking about.
That was titles. Keep them short, keep them interesting, get people wanting to read your work. What about abstracts? These are harder to write, but we do have some techniques that people can use to help to write effective abstracts, not just for review papers, but for all of their academic articles, right, Maria?
Yes, and usually in narrative reviews, it's very, very odd that you would get a structured abstract because you don't have methods per se, and you don't have results that you can talk about. You have sections that you're discussing ideas. So it's more complicated then to fit in an unstructured paragraph, to fit in a text, and to fit in a story that has a middle, a beginning, and an end. So it's really important that you ensure that you always answer the 4 main questions in your abstract, which is: why did you do it? What did you do? What did you find out? And what did you conclude? Because even in a review, you are concluding something, you are producing knowledge, you are producing ideas, and you are communicating those ideas and initiating a discourse within people in your field, because you know something that very, very narrow fields, how very, very narrow fields connect to each other, for instance. It's one of the things that review papers are very good at doing, is to pick out from different disciplines the several ways that you can solve a complex problem.
This is a fantastic technique. One of the secrets, one of the giveaways of this short LinkedIn Live event is this 4-question abstract writing technique. If you've not heard about it before, you have now. It's great. All you've got to do to write a fantastic abstract, your next conference abstract, your next article abstract, your next review paper abstract, is just answer these 4 questions, then delete the questions, and you've got words that you can edit into your abstract. But really important component of a review paper, of course, is that critical discussion. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail in the time that we have left. But you are going to explain the results, the data, what your paper is showing, interpreting those results and relating your discussion in your review paper back to the question that your overall study is addressing, right, Maria? It's going to be really important at this point to give future directions for the field, to show where the field is going to go in the future.
It's very important that review papers identify where evidence is lacking in their field, where the authors think that more work and more research on mechanism would be needed to convince themselves first and foremost, but then the rest of the scientific community and the broader audience, broader public, of how something works and how something can be used. So it is very important in the end that you don't refrain from getting your own personal view across and suggest for future directions for the field, because that's what you were attempting to do. You're influencing the direction that your field is going to take by taking on a project like that. You're not doing it just for yourself. You are explaining to the wider public how the things that you do are related and how you see them progressing in the future, how you yourself are probably going to go, and what's interesting to discover and what's important to discover.
We don't want a huge essay that goes all over the place. We want something that's tightly focused, that gives the reader that clear understanding of a particular topic. Remember, you will have been invited to write this review paper, or you will have pitched this idea to a journal editor. Either way, it could happen, but commonly you're going to get asked to provide a review paper. Let's say you've reached that stage in your career. You want, therefore, to give both strengths and weaknesses of the argument of the topic that you've been asked to write about in your paper. And here are the three key elements. What's already been found? What does all of this mean? And where are those unanswered questions, right, Maria? As we've already been discussing in this session, you're going to give people a paper that's that one-stop shop to the topic.
Yeah, so don't be generalist and say more research is needed in future. Always, more research is always needed in future.
I hate that. Yeah, I hate that.
Just say how you see the field evolving, how you see new techniques being incorporated into the work that people already do. How do you see new discoveries from other fields impacting what you do in your own work, and how you see evolution in society as a whole, and interests that the work has on people, insights on people, affecting the work that you do. For instance, a lot of people were not very interested in genetics until the Human Genome Project came to life and was funded to sequence the whole of the human genome. That was something that people that were actually very interested in genetics took advantage of to divert attention to other ways in which genetics and bioinformatics and genomics could be used. And it was a way that they had to develop a lot of new tools that are now used in very different fields.
And we all became virologists. We all became experts on viruses during the pandemic. I didn't even know what a virus was until the pandemic. Now I'm an expert. So, it's really, really important. If I had $1 for every time I've read a paper that finishes with this terrible cliche, more research will be required if we're going to understand that. It's just a terrible way to finish a paper. By the way, how should you do it, Maria? How should you finish an academic paper?
So just tell people in 3, 4, 5 sentences exactly what you found when going through this process. Give them your conclusions, rank your conclusions, say that something is more important than the other one, what's more significant, and write about whatever it is that your point to get across. The best possible way to finish something is to have a call to action that's not more research is needed, but it is we will need to develop tools in future to do this that we haven't been able to do before, or we will need to we will need to collaborate with colleagues. We will need
Finish strong. I always like to say it's a bit like running a race, writing a paper. You want to finish with that most important, most significant conclusion, leaving your readers wanting more. It's a great technique. We do want to also quickly highlight the fact that a review paper is going to have lots of references cited in it. So when you do put one together, make sure that you do cite references that you've actually read or seen, because recycling references from other work incorrectly is a huge problem in the literature, and it can lead to lots of incorrect citations, propagating incorrect information in the literature. Right, Maria?
Yes, that is a very, very difficult thing to come across. And one of the things that I had a lot of difficulty in the very beginning of my career, because I had to cite papers from the 1970s, and there was no internet to be able to tell me they actually existed. I could see something being cited in other papers, but I didn't have access to those. So I had to actually find physical copies of those to make sure that you can't just cite something that you haven't read. It's incredibly important that you don't propagate something that has been misread, misinterpreted, because it happens sometimes. Um, Someone in the comments is saying, how important is it to connect the focus of your research to other fields? I would say it's quite important, not to any specific field, but just open up the possibilities of your work being read by others and being used by others. That is good for you, and that is good for other people as well. So if you're studying AI in clinical decision support systems, if it's useful for medical education, say it's useful for medical education. You don't have to go into specifics on pedagogy and education. You can just say it can be used as a tool in courses in medical schools or whatever it is. And I think it's probably okay.
Absolutely. One of the keys to successfully publishing in higher impact factor journals, getting great, highly cited papers out there, is to make those connections between different fields. So you can do it absolutely in the discussion. I think it's a great opportunity, a great thing to do. Like, don't forget to proofread your papers. As you can see here, we see lots of silly mistakes appearing in the literature, especially these days now that people are using various AI tools to create papers. They make mistakes too, by the way. They hallucinate literature. So you've got to always check that what you're citing, what you're being told exists as a citation, is a real citation. Edit your work. Don't leave ChatGPT prompts in your final paper, as has happened a few times. Don't forget to edit out comments that you've made on the reference list, as you can see here on this example. And with that, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us in this bi-weekly LinkedIn Live event. We'll be back soon. If you have suggestions for what we could talk about, what we should talk about, we appreciate those. We always love to hear back from our ever-growing SciTrain audience. Let us know what your issues are, your pain points are. We'll come back and we'll talk about them in the next episode of How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Gareth. Maria, thank you so much for your time today. Hope you're feeling better soon and have a great weekend.
Bye.